We have so much to get to on this week's episode of the OHL podcast that we tell you to brace yourself because the information is going to come fast. It's going to come furious. And we're getting a visit from none other than Jon Morosi as well, who's going to talk USA hockey. And fans in Saginaw will like it particularly, I have no doubt. But I think we're all going to enjoy the American perspective on NCAA rule changes, back to back World Junior Championships for Team USA, and more with Jon Morosi coming up on this episode of the OHL podcast. Dan Mahar, let's dive in. Let's talk about Niagara Falls, but not Niagara Falls, Ontario, Niagara Falls, New York as a possible destination for the Ontario Hockey League.
Yeah, I think it makes sense on a lot of levels, right? You've got the New York State market that the OHL would just be clamoring to capture. So strategically, there's a lot of wealth in getting New York involved. Niagara Falls, of course, right across the border. You can draw some Canadian fans both ways. And then, of course, we hear about some prospective ownership groups at the ready and trying to get a 5 to 6,000 arena seat built. So I think on a lot of levels, it's starting to check a whole lot of boxes, Mike. So I'm not surprised this is maybe high priority for Mr. Crawford.
Two things surprised me about this story. First, when I heard it initially, I thought, okay, Niagara Falls, Ontario. It's got a rich history of major junior hockey there. And then I realized, oh no, we are talking about Niagara Falls, New York. And that made me raise a Spockian eyebrow. But the story emerging from WIVB in Buffalo tells about the city of Niagara Falls, New York, and a development company that are kind of arguing over a parcel of land. The developer says, no, this is ours. The city says, no, that's not the way it works. And so they're trying to sort that out. But in the midst of it, as you allude to, there is a desire on the part of the city of Niagara Falls, New York, to build that OHL ready arena of 5 to 6,000 seats. And then the interest expressed by OHL Commissioner Brian Crawford, who is quoted in the story as saying there are multiple ownership groups that would be interested in potentially bringing a team to Niagara Falls, New York. Now, I've heard some people kind of throw cold water on that. They don't necessarily like Niagara Falls, New York itself as a city slash market for the Ontario Hockey League. But Dan, we know that expansion has been described as aggressively planned in the Ontario Hockey League. And if there are ownership groups waiting to pony up to get into this league, New York State makes a whole lot of sense.
It does. And, there's still a lot about this story to flush out. Like the fact that they can't even agree on who owns the land suggests that we're ways off from having that arena. But when you think of how involved in the Ontario hockey landscape organizations like the Buffalo Junior Sabres are, you've got a whole lot of hockey community just over the border that's really tied into the Canadian landscape as well. So presumably you've got a whole market there that's clamoring for this level of hockey. I think it's ripe for it. And I just strategically, in terms of location too, it doesn't get a whole lot better than that location wise, does it?
I could not agree more. I think it's almost an ideal spot for expansion into New York State. So, look, bottom line is this: the Ontario Hockey League is not going to be just 20 teams for too much longer, if I do say so myself. Let's move on to two of the teams that have been in the league a long time and have been rivals of one another for almost as long. I'm talking about the Kitchener Rangers and the London Knights. And why, Dan, does it seem that no matter what happens on the ice between the two teams, there's always some drama that emerges from a Knights Rangers game? And that's the case again after the game last week, won by the Rangers 5-2. But all of the talk afterwards is about the streak, Easton Cowan's point streak that some say actually came to an end in that game versus Kitchener. Others say, no, it didn't. It's still active and we're still counting the games. What do you take from this latest drama in the storied history of London versus Kitchener?
Okay, well, to set the stage, first of all, officially there's still a streak because he did get an assist on the score sheet. And from what we're told from the OHL, there won't be a review. That has to be asked for by the team scoring the goal. So it's likely to stand. let me preface this by saying I don't really have a horse in the race either way. I'm happy to see this streak extend for the kids' sake. It's a phenomenal achievement. But my whole viewpoint is on the integrity thing, and we want to get it right first and foremost. So I think there was some confusion about when this goal was scored. I heard people say, "Well, did it or did it the puck not touch Jacob Julian's stick after it hit the rebound?" Because that's the issue. After that, we know it went to Jared Woolley, who took the shot, and Landon Sim got the rebound. So we know that if it touched Julian's stick, that's the issue at debate here. The London Knights, of course, say no, it didn't. Of course, they're going to say that they want the streak continue. That it's their player they're promoting here. So obviously, we know what we're hearing from London. I'm not sure anyone else saw definitive proof, so it's really hard to say. It sure looked like it might have grazed the stick, and no, you don't need control. Any graze, any touch, any breezing of the pants, even technically, is an assist in a scoring play. So, I guess to wrap up, my whole thing is just you want to be careful about the integrity of these things because any streak when it gets to this length is going to have a few asterisks. People are going to say, "Well, that was a cheapie," or maybe I'm not sure about that one. And it stands to reason that it might be a cheapie that takes it away at the end of the streak as well. So these things happen, and all I would say is that you want the integrity of the record books to be there because you don't want too many people questioning and saying, "Well, was it or wasn't it? Oh, sure, it's 60, but." So it's a tough one. You hate to see it end on something like that, and it doesn't look like it's going to based on the official scoring. But you kind of gotta. You're damned if you do, damned if you don't, aren't you? With the league, Mike.
Well, you are, and you're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't when these two teams are involved and the passionate fan bases that exist for both of them. Let's just be clear. We're just going to be like fully above board for the sake of accuracy and the integrity of this podcast. There is a debate to be had here. I honestly, like you said, Dan, horse in the race, I could not possibly care less one way or another. But the reality is, the way the play transpired, there were people in that arena in Kitchener on Tuesday night that wondered if the secondary assist was scored correctly from the very first moment it was announced. So this, long story short, this is honestly, truly, no skin in the game, a debatable point. Yes?
Oh, Mike, I'm one of the ones that was sitting right behind that net, and without even knowing what the scoring play was going to look like at the time, I thought it hit the stick. So I'm going to go on record as saying it looked to me like it did graze Julian's stick. Uh, so a lot of people, I think, a very debatable point to answer your question. Yes.
Okay. So I've got I've got a number of thoughts on this and branches on the tree of the conversation from where I'm sitting. First and foremost, something that you alluded to, Dan. Yes, debatable point, but the only way it gets overturned and the assist taken away from Easton Cowan is if his teammate Jacob Julian says, "I touched that puck, it was my assist." There's not a teammate in the land who is going to do that for or against their teammate who's on this incredible streak of points in consecutive regular season games. So I have the utmost respect for the London Knights as a team because this goes to show how tight they are and they know what's what. And of course, they're going to rally around each other. And that is included, by the way, in their general manager, Mark Hunter. And I'll get to more about him in just a moment, but who's in the newspaper the next day saying anybody who thinks that this was a Jacob Julian assist is out in left field. So for me, the wild part about this whole story is the next morning after the game, I shared, because the OHL put out the highlights on social media, as they always do, and I shared that goal on my X feed as an example. By the way, you can find me on X at Farwell_OHL. Dan is at his name, at Dan Mahar. I shared that goal as an example of how London hurts you in so many ways and how talented the team is, right? Cowan's coming into the zone along the wing. He gets tied up. He throws a puck back towards the middle of the ice. Jacob Julian redirects it with his stick, and that means Landon Sim has to reach out with his skate, but he does that, keeping the play alive. It kicks to Jared Woolley, who finds a nice soft spot, the top of the slot, takes the shot, and after Landon Sim deflected that puck with his skate, what does he do? He goes to the net. Where do you get goals in hockey? At the net front. And sure enough, Woolley's shot. There's a rebound. Landon Sim bangs it in. All of a sudden, the London Knights have life in that game. They were down 2-0 at the time. All I did was share it to say, this is an example of why London is London. And the next thing you know, I'm getting messages, many messages saying, that was scored as an Easton Cowan assist. I'm like, oh, because when I look at the replay, I see Jacob Julian's stick. I slowed it down to watch it more closely. You can see Jacob Julian's stick move when the puck hits it, in my opinion. Whatever. I don't care. I've got nothing against Easton Cowan. I hope he gets 1,000,000 points in his hockey career. I hope he has another 60 game point streaks. I just looked at it and said, oh, well, Jacob Julian touch that puck. And so the scoring play should be Sim from Woolley, who took the shot, from Julien, who deflected the puck. Whatever. End of story. Let's move on. Until the aforementioned general manager of the London Knights is quoted in the paper, the London Free Press, as saying that radio guy in Kitchener, and that would be me, is out in left field if he thinks it touched Julian Stick and Easton Cowan didn't get the assist. And I'd like him to show me, look, Mark, I can see the same video you can see. And as Dan and I have already discussed, this is absolutely a debatable point. If you think it's Easton Cowan's assist, good for you. I think it's Jacob Julian's assist. Good for me. You can think I'm out in left field. I won't say you're in left field, but I will say, sir, I respectfully disagree. I saw it differently. I don't care. I'm not losing any sleep over this. And good on you for circling the wagons like the London Knights have done, Jacob Julien is doing. I think it's great that you're all coming to the defense of your teammate, of your player, and you want this streak to continue. I think it's fantastic. Only Jacob Julien knows, and it's not going to matter at the end of the day. Nobody cares later on. I really don't think there are a lot of people talking about this streak outside of London and, well, except I guess us here on this podcast. But whatever. What I find fascinating in all of this, and I'm almost done, I promise. What I find fascinating is, like, Dan, you said you weren't sure that this was Easton Cowan's assist originally. Has Mark Hunter sent you a message at all to tell you you're in left field or you're wrong on this and he'd like you to show him the video? Any chance he sent you a message about that?
I don't think Mark Hunter has any clue who I am or whether I exist, so that's probably something to do with it. And you're absolutely right about the London Knights, the mentality, all for one for all, circle the wagons. Like, nothing that came out of London or the Hunters surprised me in any way. I expected that to. I mean, maybe you got scapegoated a little there for for your post. I don't know. All I know is on this one, not really caring one way or the other. I mean, what's the takeaway from a streak, whether it's 60 games or 80 games or 40 games? The takeaway is this kid's good at scoring and consistent at scoring. Do we really care what the number is? The only one that could really settle this debate one way or the other is the OHL. If they said, this is obviously a point of interest for our league, we're going to look at this video and make a ruling like you would with a high stick. In the absence of doing that, we're left with all this conjecture. So all I'll say to end is I'm with you, Mike. As a fairly neutral viewer there, not caring one way or the other, I think it's a fairly cheap way to end the streak because Cowan did actually create that play. But by the book, it looked to me like 3 Knights touched that puck after he did, therefore streak over. And don't forget the Kitchener side of this as well, which I'm sure we're going to be accused of being biased in favor of. But these kids are putting their game on the line, trying to stop this. They're taking pride in trying to stop this as well. So either way, this one side's going to feel ripped off here. But I kind of saw it the way you did, Mike.
So to that end, Dan, I'm actually rather flattered that the general manager of the most successful junior hockey franchise in the past quarter century is that concerned with what I have to say about this. Like, I am on Mark, I am so flattered. Thank you. Thank you for elevating my profile as an observer of this game and adding gravitas to the words that I speak. Am I out in left field? Maybe I am. The other thing that Mark said in the paper when this was printed or published in the London Free Press is that it was embarrassing that I would indict the off-ice officials in Kitchener, which, in fairness, I probably did. If you are watching our podcast on YouTube, you can check out Fridays with Farwell, which is a little story I tell every Friday as we're heading into another weekend of games. And I addressed this in my most recent Fridays with Farwell video. And yes, without naming names, I was actually a little bit nervous about doing this. But I think one of the big takeaways in all of this is to make sure that we get things right so that we don't end up in a situation like this where everybody's debating whether or not the streak continued or whether or not the streak ended. I don't want to make my friends. I know all the people that do the work at the Kitchener Memorial Auditorium. It's like my second home. So I didn't call anybody out by name. I didn't shake my fist at the sky and say, this is awful. This is an injustice. And I just used it as an opportunity to point out two things. One is these people that do the work are glorified volunteers. They get a really tiny honorarium. They might get a free meal. They have an important job to do. That's all. And they have the technology at their disposal to do the job as effectively as possible. I thought, here's a teachable moment. I want the best for this game. I love this game. Just a reminder, everybody, even at this level, I know we're not the NHL, but it matters. And try your best. Try your best to get it right because this is a debatable point. Hey, maybe they did, and I'm wrong or out in left field. Totally fine. But I think Mark Hunter was right about that. It's embarrassing for a Kitchener guy to call out the off ice officials in Kitchener. I just thought, good reminder here. Let's do our job well. Last thing I'm going to say about this. My mom always taught me if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. So I'm going to ignore that advice to a point, but I'm not going to go as far as I would like to when it comes to the author of that story in the London Free Press. All I will say about Ryan Payette is that it is he who is the embarrassment in all of this, because that is flat out, without question, the most embarrassing thing you could put your name to and publish. And colleagues don't do that to one another. But that's okay, Payette. I know who you are. You showed your stripes a long time ago. It's embarrassing, and you are an embarrassment to journalism. You can be a biographer of the London Knights or a stenographer for the team all you want. But I do not take seriously, sir, what you do. I haven't for a long time, but this is what they might call the final straw. It's embarrassing for you to do your job, if you can call it that, the way that you do. That's an embarrassment.
Uh yeah, and if I could walk it back just a second, Mike, I'm going to say I'm not even sure that what I consider what you did calling out the Kitchener off ice officials. I mean, you're just flagging a play, and we can understand if you're in that role how you might look at that and say, I'm not sure, it was maybe a sliver, it didn't impact the play. I don't want to be the one to take the streak away on that. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. I understand that psychology from there. I don't think it was a massive call out by any stretch. What I will say, I will take one issue though with Mark Hunter's comments. As a guy who's played baseball with you, Mike, we would never put you in left field.
So true. Way too much ground to cover out there. I occasionally got right field because nobody ever hits it that way. Other than that, it's Farwell's the back catch for slow pitch, okay? Because that's about the kind of position that he can handle on the field. You have questions, we try our best to give you answers here on the OHL podcast. We'll dive into the email inbox at ohlpodcast@rogers.com. Dan Mahar, questions came directly to you. What do you got and what do we know?
All right. Well, I'm not sure we have full clarity here, but one question was about the import rules and how many protections you're allowed. Because pretty much any information you can find online basically says the basics. Every team can protect 2 imports and have them on the roster. We know there's a couple caveats to that. We had the rule where if you're a first round NHL pick and it's unsure whether or not you're going to report, you can keep that person on your protected list. If he were to show up, you'd have to drop one of your existing imports. So we know that exists. And then there's a little nuance we learned about recently, Mike, which is you can freeze an import player that you have in your rights. If they are not going to, once November hits, if they are not going to report for the remainder of that year, you can just kind of freeze their spot. He's still ours. He won't play in the league this year. We're not sure about next year, which sounds a lot to me like extra protections, Mike. Does it not?
Yeah, it does sound like extra protections. And then there's the connection as well to the National Hockey League. And if a player is property of an NHL team, that changes the equation a little bit too.
Yeah, for sure.
Calculus,
So
that's the word I was looking
the
for. It changes
calculus,
the calculus a little bit.
indeed. So yeah, when you're property of an NHL team, not knowing where the player is going to play. So, for instance, I think we were talking about the example of Edward Shawley. You have a signed NHL player, then it depends on. So the rights can be withheld by the OHL team, correct, until they're reassigned. And so it works very similarly to them reporting from elsewhere, correct? So I have that
But
right,
it
Mike?
it becomes like an NHL list instead of your own. So
Yes,
the players that you've got frozen or protected are kind of yours, and then that player with the NHL rights is on an NHL list.
correct,
Yeah.
correct. So it all adds up to there being a few caveats to the import rules. So even though you'll read it's just two per team, teams can hold players for a little longer than that, especially if they're signed on that NHL deal, DLC. So that's why you'll see some teams that have a few players still in their stable technically, even though a couple may never show.
Bottom line is that the import draft itself is a very curious one, and now the rules around who you're protecting or how many also become difficult to keep up with. It should be a book unto itself. I know you got another question too, Dan, about scholarship and development agreements.
Yeah, I'll try and be quick because this one gets very complicated. But when players sign an OHL standard scholarship and development agreement, so your first round picks automatically get what's considered a gold package, which is full ride for all 4 years. Those are 4 of 7 that a team's allowed to have. After that, the standard scholarship and development agreement, you get a year of books and tuition at the going rate of the nearest institution to where you're playing. Um, for every year you play in the league, you get a year of tuition. Now, caveats like everything. That one can be negotiated further by agents, family advisors, whatever you want to call them. So if a player has a little bit higher pedigree, but there's no gold packages in that town, they can negotiate and get that bumped up where it's a guaranteed 4 years of books and tuition covered, some other caveats in there. So that becomes a bit of a negotiation, but all of these might go through the league. So the the administration of it, the payout of it is all through the league so that they can standardize to some degree and avoid some of the shady stuff for the dealings with teams.
I can tell that people think you're the smart one on this podcast because they send you the tough questions. Nick writes to OHL podcast at Rogers.com, something a lot more in my wheelhouse. I could take a swing at this one into left field for sure. Hey, guys, a few quick questions for the two of you. In the Eastern Conference, at the time of this email, the Ottawa 67s are holding on to the last playoff spot by 1 point over North Bay, 9 points above Peterborough. Do you believe that either North Bay and or Peterborough will catch and or surpass Ottawa for the final playoff spot in the East? In the West, there appears to be 5 teams vying for the final few playoff positions. Can the Owen Sound Attack or Guelph Storm catch the Sioux Greyhounds, Sarnia Sting, or even the Flint Firebirds? In other words, to go to Nick's subject line, it's the basement question, Dan. Why not? Let's stop looking at the top of the conferences. What do you think? Is Ottawa going to squeak in? Do North Bay and Peterborough miss in the East? And who misses in the West?
Well, we're about 2/3 the way through, so things are starting to clear up, but there's a lot could change between now and then. All I know is in the preseason predictions, I predicted North Bay and Peterborough to miss the playoffs in the East, and I'm going to stick to those guns and say that that's how it will finish. Ottawa's starting to maybe figure things out, hopefully with a big win this week. In the West, much more cloudy. I predicted the Sioux and Owen Sound to miss the playoffs. It's starting to look like it's going to be Guelph and Owen Sound. There's still a lot of runway for that to change, but there's a little bit of buffer there up to the Sioux. So I'd say my East predictions are looking a little more solid than the West ones, Mike, but I think a lot can happen between now and then.
I am so far off base on everything when it comes to the predictions that I made. I had Sarnia and Windsor missing in the West. I don't think that's going to happen. I had Sudbury and Niagara missing in the East. That's not going to happen. Directly to Nick's question, I think Ottawa still has too much skill and depth on the roster to slide down. North Bay, the youth movement is on, and Peterborough is too far back. Although I like the way they've certainly started to play over the previous third of the season for sure. So I see North Bay and Peterborough missing in the East, and in the West, it's a similar story. As gritty as Owen Sound has been over the years and consistently getting to those 30 wins, etc., the youth movement is there, and they just don't have the depth. They've got Carter George, but he can only take you so far with such a young team. And Guelph has obviously taken a big step back in terms of age. They've got the youth movement going on as well. So I anticipate that both Owen Sound and Guelph will miss in the West as well. And I'll add to that Sarnia, who I think has been playing real well. They seem to have figured things out too. So I can't see them falling back. So I've got Guelph, Owen Sound in the West missing at this point, and North Bay, Peterborough missing in the East.
Yeah, that checks out. Yeah, just looking at the overall predictions, I know a lot can change with how close teams are, but right now the only team making me look really bad is the hometown Kitchener Rangers, who are a lot better than I predicted.
They're a lot better than a lot of people
Yeah.
predicted, Dan, holding a very solid third place in the Western Conference and the Ontario Hockey League. We love your questions. Send them anytime. OHL podcast at Rogers.com. We told you we have lots for you on this week's episode, including a conversation with Jon Morosi. We'll get the perspective of somebody south of the border on rule changes. And Jon has to share with us something really cool that's coming up with some Detroit Red Wings alumni in Saginaw in the week ahead. Plus, your wraparound and prospects of the week, all still to come on this week's episode of the OHL podcast. Playoffs? We're talking about playoffs? Yeah, you bet we are. Get in on the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Scoring touchdowns is key to winning in the playoffs, and you can score big by betting on them at DraftKings, the number one place to bet touchdowns. Ready to place that first bet? Try betting on something simple like a player to score 6. Go to DraftKings Sportsbook app and make your pick. New DraftKings customers can bet $5 to get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code THPN. That's code THPN for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets instantly when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook. The crown is yours. I'm thinking back as we welcome Jon Morosi to the OHL podcast. We first started crossing paths, Jon, more than a decade ago. I'm working at the Fan in Toronto. You're a regular contributor for baseball, obviously, because that's what people know you best as. But every once in a while, we'd be starting to talk a little bit about hockey because deep down in your American heart of hearts, you love the great Canadian game, don't you?
I do, Mike, and thank you so much for having me on the show today. I'm a huge fan of the podcast, the great work that you and Dan do, and I listen to it religiously, and I get so much perspective on the league from you. So this is a real thrill for me. And you're right, I would so often weave hockey into my baseball segments on the Fan. That, as you know, Ryan Fabro would develop this drop that whenever I would start talking too much about hockey, the big voiceover would say, "Whoa, stick to baseball, Morosi." And as I recall, I think it's still on the soundboard somewhere at the Fan to this day, because they all know how frequently I will like to work in references. But it really is, as you know, if you're from Michigan, if you're from Ontario, we're all part of the same family. We're just cousins. We just happen to be living on different sides of a river or a lake, or however it is, depending on what part of the province or the state you're living in. Because I know I grew up in Michigan watching Hockey Night in Canada. We've got two OHL franchises in Michigan and have now for some time. So it really is. It's a community that transcends the border, and we all watch the World Juniors together, and we watch the Memorial Cup, which is, of course, was just awarded in Saginaw to Saginaw last year. So it really is a community that transcends any sort of geographic boundary.
Fair to say, beyond the junior game, which I know you're very much enjoying, but you would be a Wings fan based on being a Michigan native?
Of course, grew up. So I am Mike. To use the hockey wording, I am an '82 birth year. So you do the math, and I would have been just turned 15 when the Wings won their cup in '97, and then of course 1 year older when they won it again in '98, and then by the 2002 cup, I was actually just getting into journalism, and I covered a couple games during the Wings Avs series that ended with Waugh being chased in that game 7 at the Joe. So uh, the Wings are it's a special relationship because they were the team I followed as a kid, and then I started doing some writing around Wings games as I got into journalism. So while I'm not at LCA all the time, certainly I'm always following, and that is in a lot of ways my hockey home.
Would love to get your perspective, Jon, on the change that we have just seen for Major Junior Hockey. And that, of course, is the NCAA ruling that allows players to skate in a game in the CHL, but maintain their NCAA eligibility. From your lens on that side of the border, what does this look like?
Well, Mike, it's a great question, and it's one that I know from speaking with people on the U.S. side of the game. And I remember I asked this question to David Carl around the World Juniors, and he acknowledged that even for someone who is as close to the college game as David is, he is synonymous with college hockey in the United States right now with all the success he's had. He said it's going to take a while to figure out where all this lands. And he is someone that's had success with having Canadians on his roster at Denver, and really recruiting around the world because of the brand they've been able to build. But there's no question, Mike, that it is disruptive. And one thing David did say is it brings a lot of choice for players and optionality, and that's really good. As a parent myself, realizing that, and my oldest daughter is 12, realizing that kids in the hockey world previous to this ruling were having to make somewhat, not necessarily permanent decisions, but you're moving along either the college track or the major junior track when you're not much older than my oldest kid is right now. And I'm thinking to myself, that's not ideal because teenagers change their mind a lot about things. And we should give them a little bit of grace and flexibility to go on whichever path is best for them. So I think for the player, it's really good. I think it does create some different complexities with respect to, for example, the USHL. And you consider all of the top level Canadian talent that has gone through the Chicago Steel in recent years. Owen Power, Macklin Celebrini, Adam Fantilli, who just had that amazing hat trick in his hometown. Would those players go to the USHL if they had the option of playing in the O and then going to college? Perhaps not. And so I think it will result in some lost opportunity for the USHL in terms of the elite players that have come through. And yet, when you look at what Adam Fantilli was able to do and have an outstanding freshman year at Michigan and then sign with Columbus, was he facing better competition and perhaps older competition by having his what ended up being, because he was a later birth date in terms of the draft, he has his final year before college in Chicago and then plays at Michigan against adults, men, 22, 23-year-old college players. Would he have been better served by that path or playing for London for 2 years or for Saginaw for 2 years? I don't know. And I think that that's an interesting decision that's very player specific. But that to me is going to be the question. I think it depends on the player, the circumstance, the family, where their development is best. Do they need a lot of games, or is it better for them to play a shorter number of games and get in the weight room more? I think the answer is, like a lot of things in life, Mike, it depends. And I think that it will depend on the player and the optionality. But do I think it's a good thing that CHL players have a chance to further their education and change their lives by going to these amazing college hockey programs? Yes, I do. But there certainly are some complexities that we're probably only now beginning to fully appreciate.
Love the way you put that with it depends, John, because really, and look, I think part of it is the way we are in life today. We just want answers right now. We want them in nice, tidy, neat little packages. In sports, we want an outcome to every game, but really, we love talking about winners and losers as well. Player absolutely is a winner in all of this, which we'll all agree, I believe, is a great thing. How it all kind of sorts itself out over the next number of years remains to be seen. It depends.
It does. And I think that it's amazing, Mike. We always, whether it's in sports or life, we tend to overreact to things, right? And in November, Team CHL dominates the NTDP, and on this side of the border, we're saying, "Oh my gosh, what's going on? What are the U18 Worlds going to look like? And how much of a crisis is this?" Then a month later, the U.S. wins a second straight gold at the World Juniors, and USA Hockey's on top of the world, and all is well. And Canada has this crisis. Did they pick the right team? Why'd they leave Zane Parekh and Greentree and any number of other players home? And so the answer, Mike, as you know well, is probably somewhere in the middle. That you're rarely as great as you seem when you win, and you're rarely as poor as you seem when you lose. And we have to remember, I think one of the things that I do like about the way the U.S. handles their World Junior selection, and I think this is good, is that they are open-minded when a player, he may have been at the program and then and then maybe struggled in college and he's not on the World Junior team, but there may be a player that did not make the program that may have played in the OHL. Joey Willis, for example. And he was cut from the program. He goes and wins a Mem Cup. Then he goes and helps the U.S. win a World Junior Gold. I'm always happy when they stay with a kid who was not at the program. He's playing in the he's playing in the USHL. And then, like an Austin Bernovic, comes up and has a huge goal for the U.S. To help them win a gold medal. That to me is really important. And you're around the junior game so much, Mike, and you know it so well. I think any of us who are either following this closely or our parents or our teachers or coaches, you know that a 15-year-old can be a dramatically different person by the time they're 17, 18, 19. And the biggest thing, whether it's this discussion about CHL players playing in the NCAA or almost any other selection for any other team, you have got to be patient, because you look at the Four Nations face-off coming up. Connor Hellebuck was playing high school hockey in Michigan and then went down to the Null. Jeremy Swayman was basically cut from a team in the Null and then had to make his way back. You've got to be patient with these players. I know we talked before off air about Christian Epperson and what he's done for Saginaw. That to me is the most important thing, is to be dynamic and nimble in your thought process, whether you're a player, whether you're an advisor, agent, whether you're a coach, whether you're picking a national team. Things change so much. And I think the best thing that we can all do is keep a fresh perspective and not put players and people in boxes and keep them there, because they evolve, they change to where what seemed like it was a good strategy for you 2 years ago, or importantly, Mike, what seems like a good strategy for someone else in your birth year. Well, if they're leaving college after 1 year, then I should too. Well, I like to point out on the college side of things, Brock Faber spent 3 years at the University of Minnesota. And if Brock Faber needed 3 years there, a lot of you need 3 years at wherever you're, whether it's junior or the American League or college hockey. Don't be in a rush, because consider the success of Brock Faber as, I think, a really good data point for giving yourself the time to develop.
Another great example. And you make reference there, John, to the back-to-back World Junior Golds for Team USA. I'm old enough to remember when Canada was not, I would even go so far as to say, inarguably, the dominant hockey power in the world. That's no longer the case. We're wringing our hands over here. We're wondering if there needs to be another summit. But from your side, with Team USA, what does this look like in the United States? Back-to-back gold medals at the World Juniors.
The U.S. is really set up well, Mike, to win this tournament for a variety of reasons. We referenced the NTDP, and even though not all the players on Team USA came from the NTDP, they have experienced the time they're in their U17 year of playing major international tournaments as a group, and winning as a group, losing as a group, being humbled as a group, and then having to show character as a group. And you cannot replace that. You cannot manufacture that over the span of 2 weeks. And that's where I think Canada, for all the amazing players they have, structurally, and it's not really their fault, I'm just going to make this point, structurally, because they don't have a centralized program where these players get a chance to win and lose and be happy and sad all together for 2 years and develop what the US players always call a brotherhood, it makes it challenging. Canada will often have the most skill and talent, certainly, and you consider this past year, someone like Bedard still would have been eligible, right? And Celebrini. So like there's plenty of talent in Canada. Let's not lose the plot here. But the US benefits from the continuity of having won medals before, having lost big games before, and picked themselves up. They lived together for years, Mike, and that experience you can't develop over a 2-week camp for Canada. And the other piece, and I'm just being totally honest with you, there is, if you are an 18-year-old Canadian or a 19-year-old Canadian, there is immensely more pressure on you from your country to win this tournament than it is when you're in the US. The US is so big with so many different sports that we care about. We got the NFL, we've got college football playoffs going on, you've got college basketball this time of year, NBA, everything in this massive country. And while I love the World Juniors and you do, it's one of the ultimate things where if you know it, you know it. And when you're living in it, it is the coolest and best thing in the sports world. But the percentage of us that feel that way relative to the population of the US is not very huge. And so if a US player is at Boston College or Denver or Michigan State and they lose in the quarterfinal and they're back on campus afterward, they're not getting asked about this at the dining hall from their friends. They really are not. And I love the World Juniors, but I realize that that's probably not happening. But we all know this when that group of London Knights went back home after they lost in the quarterfinal. They probably heard about it in London, rightly or wrongly, whether they're words of support or criticism, whatever it was. Everybody around them knew what had happened, how they'd lost, the questions about the coaching, the questions about the selection. Everybody in London knew everything about that tournament. And that is a fundamentally different bit of pressure on an 18-year-old or 19-year-old Canadian than what we have in the States. And so from that standpoint, you've got in the US more continuity of your roster, more chemistry on your line. You think about Leonard, Perreault, and Higgins, who played together at BC just like the previous year they had Smith on that line. So you've got the continuity built in with a fraction of the pressure. It is, for the U.S., a recipe for success. Now, it helps to have Trey Augustine, helps to have Z Bouillon. I get all of that. But we'll look up in a few years from now, there'll be plenty of great players from this Canadian birth year in the NHL. Sam Dickinson's going to have himself a nice NHL career. I'm pretty sure about that. And so I think a lot of the criticism that happens is probably not too fair for 18 and 19-year-old kids who feel the weight of their country on their shoulders for 2 weeks. That's a lot to ask of young people.
I want to get specific here on a player for a moment, and you already mentioned his name. You and I have talked about him, exchanged a few messages about him because first-year player in this league, and sure, granted, he gets to play like with a guy named Michael Misa, which helps anybody's game. However, you can't knock what Christian Epperson has brought to the Ontario Hockey League and the Saginaw Spirit. Really looking forward to a live viewing this weekend coming when we're in Saginaw. But what do you see in a player like Epperson?
He's a great story, Mike, and someone that I think has a really good developmental arc. He got some key minutes and was on the power play a bit as a U17 player at the national team program, and then U18 he lost his spot a little bit, and we've seen this many times when a player loses a little bit of special teams time and bumps down the lineup. Sometimes it's a bad cycle where they lose their confidence, and he just didn't have a very good year, and he ended up bumping down a bit, wasn't part of the team at Worlds. And so when you think about his arc, Michigan at the time, he was committed to U of M, somewhat justifiably said, well, we didn't see a great year out of you this year. Maybe another season in the USHL would be better for you. And credit the Saginaw Spirit. They had his rights. And Dave Drinkle and Laz are two of the great people in the OHL. And they said, listen, we got a really good program going on in Saginaw. We just won the Memorial Cup. Look at what Joey Willis has done. Look at what any number of players have done to boost their profile and their chances of playing in the National Hockey League, and come play with us. And we're going to have some power play time for you and some great minutes for you. And look at what Christian Epperson is doing. And he played so well, Mike, that, and this is again why you got to stay with people. I heard pretty reliably that as the U.S. was putting together their World Junior team this year, they thought about him as an underage player still, someone that wasn't drafted last year, someone that was apparently not ready to play college hockey for this season. But they were watching Joey Willis, and of course they ended up putting him on the team, and they should have because he had a great year. They're watching Willis. They said, wow, this Epperson's pretty good too. Yeah, he's one of us. So I give Christian, he deserves all the credit. I think he came in with a new mindset and new atmosphere, new environment. And this is not Michigan's fault. This is not the NTDP's fault. This is the credit of Christian Epperson. He earned this opportunity. He made himself into a player to where I expect he's got a really good chance to make the World Junior team next year. I expect he's got a really good chance to be drafted because he's a wing who can really, he attacks the net. And you see him, a lot of his goals tend to be right around the net. He's got a good shot, good nose for the net. He's really competitive. He's a big kid, physical. He's got, I think, a lot of his man strength already, and so he's got tremendous potential. And again, sometimes the Ontario Hockey League is the better fit for someone than the NCAA would be. And I think Epperson is a prime example of that. And I, again, as I mentioned early on, you got to credit Dave Drinkle and Chris Lazary. They know the game so well. Dave and his team, Brian Prout, they scout so well. They know the talent pool so well. And when it comes to the recruiting pitch, if you will, it's a really compelling one. You heard, I love the quote from Braden Hashe at the end of the Memorial Cup. I'm never leaving Saginaw, as he said. Like, he always wants to have that be, part of his home. And that, to hear that from someone who has a lot of experience in the OHL, as Braden did, has been around the game forever through his dad, that speaks volumes. And so when you treat players the right way and you get a reputation for being a good place to play and develop, you get a chance to play with Misa and Perek, who certainly from Saginaw's standpoint, they hope they have both of them back next year. There's a lot to like about Saginaw as a spot to develop, and it helps when you've got that big trophy in the trophy case outside that tends to have a pretty good impact on recruiting as well.
You make a great point on Drinkle and Lazary as a duo and what they can do to elevate a franchise, help with that recruiting. I've been following Laz since he won a Cherry Cup with the Waterloo Siskins back in my home community. Now he's got the Memorial Cup to go with it. And John, you know as well as I do that he's got his eyes on other prizes in hockey in the years ahead.
He does. And I think whether it's being a head coach at the World Juniors or at the NHL level, he could do anything because he communicates so well. And that was something I heard a lot from players. And the modern coach, yes, X's and O's, and Laz knows those as well as anybody does. But it's the ability to connect and to get your group to play for you. And you think about the way, I think it's a good microcosm of his leadership. Think about the Memorial Cup final. All that talent on London's side, and they come back and tie the game in the third period. And you would have thought, oh my gosh, how can Saginaw respond? You're in your own building and you're feeling the pressure now of you're letting this lead slip away in the final game of the year. The steadiness that he had, the way that he promoted the confidence of the group, that's the mark of a great coach, is to be able to, in those tough moments, keep your team focused and purposed along the right things. And of course, Josh Bloom gets the goal and changes the history of hockey in Saginaw forever based on that one moment. But that one moment happens because you've got a coach that's got everybody unified. And so I do think, if I not to thrust myself into an international discussion or offer an American perspective on a Canadian debate, but do I think that the World Junior team would have been different this year if Laz had been the head coach? Different style of play, probably different selection of players. I do. And I think that, I hope that the people at Hockey Canada realize the same thing.
One of the other things I'm looking forward to about my trip to Saginaw this weekend ahead, first of all, I look forward to it almost exclusively for the media room spread they put on there. Oh my God, I add 5 pounds every time. But shocks and saves, and I know this is something that means a lot to you, John.
Yeah, thank you for asking, Mike. So I'm really excited about this event coming up. So the Rangers and Spirit play at 7:00, Dow Event Center in Saginaw on February the 1st. And earlier that afternoon, 4:00, it's the Shocks and Saves game, which has become an annual event. And really the motivation, the inspiration for the game comes from Yuri Fisher. And many of our listeners right now know the story well. His heart stopped during a game playing for the Wings at the Joe almost 2 decades ago now. And his heart stopped. He very easily could have died if there was not a defibrillator there to be able to bring him back. So hence the name of the game, Shocks and Saves. And Yuri, in partnering with Dr. Stephen Vance, Dr. Peter Fatal, who are physicians in the Great Lakes Bay region, are working on putting as many automatic defibrillators as possible in public spaces, whether it be schools, office buildings, arenas like the Dow Event Center, anywhere you can name, restaurants. There should be defibrillators there because you never know when a cardiovascular event could happen. And so they've organized a game. Yuri's going to play, which is awesome. Of course, you get a chance to watch his son play in the O, so it's kind of great to see Yuri back on the ice. So a combination of of NHL and Wings alumni. So Yuri's going to play. Chris Tamer, longtime defenseman in the NHL, he's going to play. Of course, his daughter Abby is a star field hockey player at the University of Michigan. Justin Abdelkader is going to play, longtime wing, former MSU national champion. Jakob Kindle, defenseman, who played for the Wings for a while. Trevor Nill, Chris Thornburg, who still lives locally. He was a member of the original Spirit team. Of course, won a cup with the St. Louis Blues. He's a great guy. Really enjoy Chris Thorburn. So we're going to talk to Chris Thorburn, and then somehow, Mike, they've asked me to play too, and I'm not really sure how this is going to go. I play a lot of pond hockey when the weather allows. I get out and skate around with my kids. Am I a competitive hockey player? No, I am not. And so I've been asking really important questions of my friends, such as, do we think that if I play wing that I can do the least amount of damage? And they said, that's probably a safe place for you. So my approach, Mike, is going to be play wing, keep the shifts very short, try to back check responsibly, and just take decent care of the puck. And when in doubt, keep my head up. And if I see Chris Thorburn, I'll pass it to him, or a Chris Tamer, or a Abdelkader, or a Kindle, or a Fisher. When I see names on my team that played in the NHL, the puck is going to go to them, and I'm just going to be as minimal and I don't know if you can even call me a grinder. I'm just going to try to keep it simple. Pucks in, pucks out, and do the best I can.
Forecheck, back check, paycheck. That's the way we do this, Morosi.
Amen. I love it, Mike. I'm going to have that. I'm going to probably put that like on the inside of my helmet. Mike Farwell, comma, and get your quotes right in there to make sure I'm ready to roll. But I'm really excited about it. And I grew up. Part of the reason why Saginaw is dear to me is I grew up in the town just next to Saginaw in Bay City, Michigan. So that's my hometown. So for us, I remember when the Spirit first moved from North Bay more than 2 decades ago now. I was actually working as an intern at the local paper in Bay City. And I was, by then already, I knew that hockey was one of my passions along with baseball that I wanted to cover as a journalist. And so I remember telling people on the news desk, this is a really big deal. This is the OHL, people. Like, look at all the OHL alums who are in the NHL. And we're going to have a team in Saginaw. This is so awesome. So I was trying to raise the awareness as best I could. Certainly in due time, our residents have learned very quickly how much talent there is. And we've seen Cole Perfetti go on to great things, and Trocheck and Sod and so many of the great Spirit alums. But it was fun to be there when it first was announced that this franchise is moving from North Bay, because the first hockey game I had ever seen in my life was a Saginaw Hawks game. I think Eddie Belfour was playing around that era back in the, I guess, 80s. So that was the first place I ever saw an actual professional hockey game. So the Dow Event Center is dear to my heart, and it really is a proud moment to see the Memorial Cup in my home area, and to see all the great things that the Spirit are doing with the shocks and saves, and to help raise awareness.
And you got to love a guy like Yuri Fisher using the platform that he has. 17 years now, this charity game has been running.
Really, and we had it was a great part of the Memorial Cup, and it really was a thrill for me. I've always been a hockey fan, of course, but to experience a Mem Cup for the first time in person and understand what it means, to be able to share the story of what the trophy itself means, the significance of it to Canadians and to Americans as well. It's a humbling thing to be able to have in your community. And so there were the Spirit, Craig Goslin, Dick Garber, the leadership there did a great job of having different events around it. And one of them was a conversation with Yuri at this beautiful outdoor amphitheater, and Dr. Vance and Dr. Fatal as well, to talk about Yuri's story. And I was very fortunate to help moderate it, and to talk with Yuri about it, and to see how emotional he got recounting the story all these years later. It's real. It's a human story. And he talked about how still has visits all the time with his cardiologist, and his cardiologist will share with them his plan of care, the plan going forward. And you could tell it still weighs on him heavily. It's not something that you could just set aside and forget about. It's your heart every day. And so for Yuri to take that, what is certainly a burden, but to use it to shine a light and make it brighter for others, is, I just think, a really beautiful and selfless thing. He's got a great team of doctors who are involved in this too. So it's going to be a great day. And it's an honor that I get to have a chance to participate and be there and support Yuri and the Spirit and the great work that they do.
Jon, I kept you longer than I said I would, but great to do a deep dive with you on hockey, and I can't wait to see you in Saginaw next weekend. Thanks for doing this today. Really appreciate it.
Sounds great, Mike. Anytime I can help. And again, thanks to you for the great work that you do with the podcast. For us here, just know that you've got some great fans here on the U.S. side of the border that follow it carefully. And I love the way you do the wraparound. Every single team is covered. You cover all the headlines, which I really admire as well. So your thoroughness and your enthusiasm and your care really shine through.
It's a fantastic league, and it's really glad to have you as a part of it, covering these great stories, Jon. Thanks a million again. Our thanks once again to Jon Morosi for joining the pod this week. Great to catch up with an old friend and somebody who loves hockey as much as Jon. And you heard him say it a moment ago. He loves listening to the podcast, especially because we look around the league, every single team, little tidbit from them each week here on the OHL podcast. So let's do that right now. This is the Wraparound. Dan, start us off in the Western Conference this week.
Sure thing. Just wanted to point out that Erie Otter aged punch, if you will, with the overagers combining for nearly 140 points to this point in time, 2/3 the way through the season, with both Alfano and Fimis over 50 points already. That is what you call value from your overage trio.
I am on Eastern Conference duty, and it begins in Barrie, where the Colts have allowed an Eastern Conference low 126 goals on the season, while taking over first place in the conference as well. No other team has allowed fewer than 150, so the Colts far in front of everybody else in that regard. Meantime, Anthony Romani, back from his injury, he's got 3 goals in 6 games as a Colt. Romani also appeared in his 200th OHL game last weekend.
Nice. Moving to Flint, 6'7" Nathan Aspinall, point a game in the last few games. A New York Rangers pick, starting to figure it out. When guys that size start to figure out their offensive game, look out. And also the Sam McHugh pickup looking nice with 8 points in his first 6 games. So Flint, some positives.
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody kind of raised an eyebrow at that deal, but McHugh is certainly making Flint look smart on it for sure. In Brampton, it's a week of milestones for Steelheads forward Angus MacDonnell, who played in game number 200 and also picked up point number 150. MacDonnell is a prospect of the Dallas Stars, taken in the 6th round back in 2023.
Love that kid's game. Good to see him back. In Guelph, Mike wanted to talk a little bit about Lev Kavstin, the terrific year he's having. The top point per game rookie in the OHL right now. Looks like a huge positive going forward for the Guelph Storm as a 17-year-old. The only question is, with his commitment to Penn State, will he serve out his years in the OHL, or is he going to jump ship soon?
Very interesting question, and that's the dust that will settle in the years ahead with this new NCAA ruling and how it impacts the leagues. Great point there. The hottest team in the Ontario Hockey League right now, not the London Knights or the Oshawa Generals, but it's the Brantford Bulldogs, who have reeled off an impressive 8 wins in 9 games, including back-to-back wins over Oshawa and another over Niagara in the mix. Now, the streak catapulted the Bulldogs to 2nd in the OHL's power rankings. And let's not forget Patrick Thomas, who picked up a goal and 5 assists, a 6-point effort in the win over Niagara to become the Bulldogs' franchise record holder for most points in a game.
There's value from an OE. Yeah. So in Kitchener, Mike, just wanted to give a nod to another 16-year-old in Jason Schaubel, moving to 6-1-1 between the pipes in relief of All-Star Jackson Parsons, with another big win against Owen Sound and several 10-bell saves in that one. So goalie of the future in Kitchener.
I'll tell you what, being around this kid, because it's the team that I cover, he's everything you want with the demeanor of a backup goaltender, right? He knows he's not going to play a lot behind Jackson Parsons, but the kid's there, he's working, and it was great to see him get rewarded like he did with a tidy win last week for sure. How about an 8-game goal-scoring streak as we turn our attention to Kingston? That's what France forward Thomas Ironen has, 9 goals in his past 8 games. Meantime, Joey Willis. You want to talk about value from a trade? We talked about it with Sam McHugh. Willis has 4 goals and 8 points in 7 games, including his 3rd 4-point game of the season since being acquired in a trade with Saginaw. And that 4-point game, by the way, for Willis with Kingston, 2 goals, 2 assists, came against the Saginaw Spirit, burned his former team.
That had to hurt. All right. London. wins the race to the 200 goal mark, just edging out Windsor to get there first. Their 830 win percentage is starting to give them a little separation, first place in the conference. And how about Austin Elliott coming over from the WHL and deciding, well, I'm not going to lose a game before the end of January. 19,000. What a run he is on.
Incredible start to his OHL career. In Niagara, the Ice Dogs have lost their bite on the power play of late, going 0 for 7 with the man advantage in a loss to Brantford as part of a tough 2 for 22 stretch. Now, there's no need to sound the alarm. Niagara is still top 10 in power play percentage league-wide, operating at just over 23%. But the power play outage is probably part of the reason the Ice Dogs won just 3 of their first 9 games in 2025 and tumbled from top spot in the East. But there are positives. It's been a great year overall, but let's take a look at Ryan Rubrick. Now over 30 goals. He's well ahead of last year's pace and had an 8-point run in just 4 games last week.
You'll be hearing his name a lot next year in the draft.
Yeah, you sure will.
Mike, moving to Owen Sound, you know I love a great 16-year-old story, as I just said with Jason Schabel. How about Pierce Bowie? Hat trick in a shootout win over the Sarnia Sting. 24 points in 40 games for their first-round pick. And it's special when 16-year-olds are able to produce like that in this league.
North Bay, I love you, but I really don't like your unis. And I think you do that on purpose. You have that military green just to, I think, get under my skin. However, the battalion held a practice last weekend on an outdoor rink and then invited fans to skate with the team, which I think is just so cool, getting outdoors. And hey, if you're going to find some outdoor ice, you can find it in Southern Ontario this winter too, but North Bay is the place for it. And then to those unis, the battalion busted out the old black and gold colors for the game when Commissioner Brian Crawford visited North Bay. Hey, Commissioner Crawford, tell them to use black and gold all the time in North Bay.
I'm on record as loving those ones. So
yeah, they're fantastic.
They are. They really are. So if I had told Saginaw head coach Chris Lazary that you're going to go on a back-to-back games in Peterborough and Kingston, your team's going to score 13, you think he would have said, okay, well, he would have, I'm sure, but they
Absolutely.
also
I'm saying it.
well, and they gave up 15 though, Mike, and lost both those games. So nice to see them tighten up a little bit in Ottawa on Sunday afternoon. But yeah, I'm sure he could not be happy to drop 2 games where you scored 13 goals.
No question about that. People in Oshawa are happy with Colby Barlow, to be sure. He is beginning to heat up. He had a shorty, a power play goal, and 2 at even strength, including the game winner in a come-from-behind win over Peterborough. The 4 goals were a career high for Barlow, and he also added an assist for a career-high 5-point night. Now, Barlow is closing in on his 4th straight 30-goal season. Let that sink in. 4 straight 30-goal seasons in the O. And he has more than double the points in his past 21 games with the Gens as he did in his first 21. So again, Barlow getting hot.
Look out for that team. So moving to Sarnia, Mike, I noticed a little bit of a trend with the Sting, which is big win over Erie, big win over Sudbury, OT lost to Windsor, shootout lost to Owen Sound. If you notice that trend, that is points in all of those. Sting's starting to come on, and it's not out of the question they could sniff home ice in the playoffs if they keep it rolling.
I said that earlier. I just kind of like that they figured something out, and I think that long time away from home for the U17s didn't help, but they've started to come together at the right time. No question about it. Wouldn't the Ottawa 67s love a little bit of that recipe? It took the 67s until January the 25th to pick up their first win of 2025. That was a rough run of 9 losses in a row for the Barber Poles. Luca Pinelli scored a power play goal in that first victory to move into a tie for the league lead with 14 power play markers. Ethan Procession and Nick Lardis also with 14.
Nice. Mike, does it get better in a week for a goaltender than it did for Nolan Lalonde in the Sioux last week? Back-to-back shutouts, playing his 3rd game against Flint. They score on him. He says, all right, I'm not getting 3 shutouts, so how can I top this? I'll score a goal, which he did against Flint. So in a week, back-to-back shutouts and a goal. Nolan, just retire right now, because that's a story you're going to be able to tell your grandkids and everyone that you had 2 shutouts and a goal in 1 week as a goaltender. Quite a week.
You got to love the goaltender starting the bench flyby after a goal was scored, eh? Great to see.
Yeah.
In Peterborough, Pete's captain, Jonathan Malee, has committed to Sacred Heart University to play NCAA hockey next year. The 63rd captain in Pete's franchise history will finish his OHL career with more than 200 games played and, of course, the all-important OHL championship. Mali was originally drafted into the league as a second rounder, 21st overall with the Bulldogs back in 2020.
Nice. And I should point out last week on the wraparound, after criticizing Peterborough's lack of scoring, they put up 8 against Saginaw. So sorry, Saginaw.
No,
Uh,
don't be sorry. You gave them the motivation.
There you go. I'll take credit. Finishing with Windsor on the West, Mike, another great lesson for young kids. So we have a kid by the name of AJ Spellacy who went to the Chicago Blackhawks camp this summer, put on a fantastic performance. They wowed everyone in town. Returns to Windsor. Here we are in January, and he signs his ELC with those very Blackhawks. So it pays to work hard, do everything you can to impress people in camp. That paid off for AJ Spellacy, Mike.
Great story for sure. And in Sudbury, Coach Adelic has committed to Miami of Ohio University for next season. And this one is too much fun to resist. You're not just going to see Wolves forward Chase Coughlin on the ice. You're going to see him on TV. Coughlin appears as a regular on season 4 of Shoresy, which premiered last Friday. Coughlin's former trainer does some stunt coordination for the show and recommended Coughlin for the role. How do you like that? You a Shoresy guy, Dan?
Well, I'm just going to say, hopefully Coughlin's chirps are up to speed, because if he's going to be an extra on that set.
Trust me, they are, and it's fantastic. And if you are not either watching or have watched Letterkenny or Shoresy, I don't know if we can still be friends, because I'll tell you who doesn't watch those shows is Ryan Payette. I guarantee it. All right. And that is a tidbit from I know. I need to be better, Dan. Somebody said, take the high road. It's far less traveled. And then here I am down in the gutter. It's a tidbit from every team. Little something we call the wraparound, keeping our eyes on every team in the Ontario Hockey League. Even Jon Morosi likes it. We should get that as an endorsement. Even Jon Morosi likes the wraparound. Something else we do every week on this podcast is take a look at a player who is NHL draft eligible. That means an NHL team might be calling their name this June. We call it our prospect of the week. Dan, who you got?
Well, I wanted to highlight the surging Sarnia Sting, and a guy that I've had my eye on for a few weeks, just keeps producing, Mike, which is Liam Beamish. 17 points in 20 games as a rookie. Really a buzzsaw. Love his game. 4 points in the last 3 games. Liam Beamish is a guy to keep your eye on in Sarnia. Expect big totals next year from him.
That's funny. I had a close look at him this week too, but then I decided to highlight a guy who's from my home community and who I'm going to get to see when I head north this week in Sault Ste. Marie. Jordan Chiron. He signed with the Sioux back in November after starting the season in Junior B with the Air Centennials. And there are some, admittedly, rough edges to work out in his 200-foot game, but this guy is figuring out the speed and skill in the OHL pretty quickly. Took him 9 games to get his first goal, but now he's got 7 in his past 17, including 2 in his past 5. Chiron's got speed. He's got a great shot, and he is definitely trending in the right direction. So Jordan Chiron is my prospect of the week.
Great call. And they've already got Brady Martin up there, and keep an eye on Chase Reed when you get up there, Mike. Wow. Look for him next year as well.
Can't wait. Believe it or not, I used to dread it. Now I look forward to it. It's a great place to be. The hospitality of the North, and we're going to be taking it in the week ahead. And then, of course, Dan and I will be back in your ears and on your computer screens if you watch us on YouTube, of course, next Tuesday with another episode of the OHL Podcast.